Welcome to Game School Radio. I'm your host, Mo Hafez, and today we sit down with Jack Wall, the eclectic and talented composer behind Myst 3 and 4, as well as the celebrated Mass Effect series. Jack, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Mo.
Welcome.
Pleasure.
I must admit that actually I first heard of you and heard your name with Myst 3. That's one of the...
Oh, I thought you were going to say yesterday.
Yeah.
Heard me yesterday.
No, first time. I mean...
Yeah, that was back in 2000.
That's right.
Yeah.
Myst 3, when I remember when I first loaded it in, they had such an epic score opening, and it was something that I wasn't actually used to with video game music. And it was amazing. I was like, who did this? And you yourself actually said that it was the score that put you on the map.
Oh yeah, I started working in video games back in 1996, and through some connections working with a company up in San Francisco called Post Linear, I met this guy named Dan Irish, and Dan and I are still great friends to this day. But he called me one day after I'd helped him with another project, and he said, "You're not going to believe this, but I'm going to be producing the next Myst game, and there's a lot of eyes on this, so I'm going to have to audition you, and audition other people as well." But lucky for me, I won the audition. It was a big challenge and they came up with the budget to record with an orchestra, and so they wanted to do something special. So it was fun. I wrote the theme, and everybody kind of they were like, "Yeah, we really like that."
Now, you had done works previous to that, obviously.
Oh yeah. I had done like maybe 7 or 8 games before that.
And now the music in Myst 3, it besides having an orchestra, it used a huge number of eclectic and a variety of instruments. I mean, is that something that you introduced, or is that something that was an influence from the games previous?
Well, I actually, it's kind of funny to think back about how I did that game, because I took pretty much how I did that game, and I've taken that into almost every game I do, where I really do a kind of a deep study of what, if it's a sequel and I didn't work on the previous games, I try to figure out like really what the essence of that game is about, and what worked and what didn't. And the way that I tried to work with Myst, the Myst series, was Robin Miller was the composer of the first Myst game and the second game, which was called Riven. And a little side story. I mean, I actually got into video games because of Myst. I played that game in '93 or '94, somewhere around there, and thought it was just an amazing new opportunity to write music for this new medium, because I love that score. It was really something that was quite made it immersive, and when you played the game, all it was little beautiful little pictures on flashcards, basically, or hypercard stacks that you would click on the screen, and it would sort of dissolve into the next node that you went into. But this dreamy music was floating in the background. It was just wonderful.
So, what kind of changes did you bring to the franchise?
We had, Myst 3 was going to be a 3-dimensional game. It wasn't going to be like the original Myst game, and Riven for that matter. So I felt that we had to update and really figure out how to write music for a 3-dimensional adventure game that was going to be somewhat different. And I think what worked really well for Myst, and I played both Myst and Riven, I played the whole games, and one thing that I kind of felt that I wanted to change about what Robin had done, and honestly it was more of a technical consideration for Robin, but he didn't want any melody in the game because, and for good reason, melody gets repetitive and it sort of takes you out of the experience.
And it's a very atmospheric game.
Yeah, it's a very atmospheric game, and Myst is the same way, but there's more of a story to it. So when certain moments happen, I do want to hear some melody, and that's what I missed in those other two games. You know, they didn't have the ability to switch it out or whatever, and we did. So I actually designed an interactive playback system to make that possible with the programmers and the audio director. And I had my assistant help me work on that was Myst 4, but in Myst 3 I actually started that process and we perfected it in Myst 4. But you know, it was all about trying to make the music work more like a film would work. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you know, you're the character going through this story basically interactively. So if we can try to make the music follow that, it's gonna have more variety, and it's gonna feel like when you hear that melody, a specific melody, it's gonna feel like a special moment, like you did something, and that's gratifying to the player. You know, you finally accomplish something, and then you hear. We had these pieces of music called reward pieces. So if you unlocked an age and you went into the age, the first 3 minutes were just this kind of cool piece of music with melody and everything, and then that would go away and it would become ambient again.
So in 2004, now you won several awards actually for your work on Myst 4.
Yeah.
Now, not just for Best Music of the Year, but for Best Original Choral Song and Live Recording. Now, I've noticed that you're one of few composers who knows how to incorporate chorus well in your compositions, and I've noticed this especially in Myst 3 and 4. Tell us about that. Was that something new, something that you brought to the table?
Well, it really depends on the story for me, whether you put a chorus or choir into the music. A lot of games don't, like I didn't put any choirs in Mass Effect, and I didn't because that wasn't the thing that I wanted to do in Mass Effect. I wanted to do other things. I wanted to bring in sort of the 80s style arpeggiated, electronics and more of that aesthetic. In Myst 3, there was this character named Savidro, and he was this. You see him as a boy, and then you see him as a man, and he became this kind of sort of demented guy. There was sort of an epic story behind him. It was 20 years of him being imprisoned on this island, if I recall. It's been a while. I felt that the theme song should reflect the sort of epicness of the story, that he went through. In the Myst and Riven, it's everything's really mysterious, But when you get to Myst 3 Exile, it's like, wait a minute, something really huge is going on behind the scenes, and that I felt that theme helped to bring that story out.
Now, to backtrack a little, actually, you have one of the most interesting stories, I think, about how you got into video game music compositions. It seems you're very passionate about it. Tell us, why video game music?
Well, my background was as a record producer, engineer. So I spent a lot of time in studios making records and working with people like John Cale and David Byrne. This was back in the, late, the 90s, basically. I had gotten to this point where I felt like over time, I was always a musician, right? But over time I had learned how to record and then produce and then mix and then arrange. And I was doing all these extra jobs for John Cale, and I ended up helping him arrange some of his compositions. And I thought, and simultaneously working with him, I was producing albums for other artists. And I always felt like the material that these people are writing is good, but I'd like to try my hand at writing music. So I didn't really write any music until '96 when I started my very first video game. But just prior to that, when I played Myst, I thought, well, there's an opportunity. I could get into this industry because it's not crowded, and I can find my way through this industry. I think it's a really cool medium. Video games are going to go places. I just predicted that.
One of the things that really impresses me about you, Jack, is your versatility with music compositions. Your score for Jade Empire, for example, was quite robust and kind of had a very cultural feel to it. How are you able to capture this culture in your composition? I mean, going from a game like Myst and then to Jade Empire, where the score sounds completely different.
We wanted to create sort of an East meets West sound, but because if you listen to just pure Chinese music, to Western ears, it's really a foreign sound, and it's like a little too much, you know. It's just it's wall to wall, just Chineseness, you know. So I kind of mixed Pan-Asian styles like taiko drumming, and then Chinese instruments like guzheng and the yangqin, and I just researched it. But I'll tell you what really helped me the most on that one was I hired a Chinese music consultant. And what he did for me was important. We got together in the beginning of the project, and he helped me understand how Chinese music was notated, how the Chinese musicians he knew would, what kind of instruments to use, pipa and dizi, which is like the little bamboo flute. He played that, and he played the yangqin. His wife played guzheng, which is like the giant zither, and it's a very classical Chinese sound. So, and then I got taiko drummers, and we recorded all these instruments, and I would record, like I would write the pieces in a basic way. I would hand off Western notation to this guy, Zhiming Han. He would then translate it into Chinese music notation, because all his friends were from like the Hong Kong orchestra. And you know, their orchestra isn't like the Western orchestras with the strings. They all have air hus, you know, and zhenghus, which are like violas. He would bring these people over here, and we would record right here in my studio. We got a really authentic sound mixed with like Western orchestra, and so that was quite a bit of fun. You know, what I love about composing is that my knowledge is but a drop in the ocean. So I'm always, you know, people think, oh, he really knows what he's doing. Nothing could be further from the truth. I have no idea what I'm doing. And I constantly am learning new ways to do it. And I prefer to think of it that way, you know. I always feel like I'm a kid in the candy store, you know. When I'm composing, I feel like I can come in here today and leave tonight with a completely new piece of music. And that's so exciting to me.
BioWare's Mass Effect has
Yeah.
been described as a space opera with its very intricate plot, fleshed out characters, and stellar presentation. Quite a success, obviously. And a huge part of that is owed to you for the music. How did you go about undertaking the task of scoring this game? I think it's monumental.
Yeah, it's interesting because again, I had to audition. You almost always have to audition. You have to like write a piece of music, and that process is fraught with all kinds of problems because for me, it takes me, some time to get into what it really should be.
Mm-hmm.
But somehow I won the audition against some really great people, and it's I'd worked on Jade Empire, so they were used to working with me. So I'm sure that helped me get the job. But this was a totally different producer, totally different director, and he just chose my work. Later on, he told me that it had a certain sound and maturity to it that he liked. He liked the fact that he felt I was more versatile, like I could do more things, which is cool. But two of the other guys who auditioned are Sam Hulick and Richard Jakes. And about halfway through composing Mass Effect 1, I was going through some personal family stuff. And so I had to travel and I had to deal with all that. One of the solutions that I helped to come up with was, look, I got this personal thing I got to deal with, and it happens. And when you're composing, it's just all of your attention, and you can't really back off from that. So I said, one of the pieces of music that was done for the audition, when I heard it, I literally said to the producers, I said, why did you hire me and not whoever wrote this? Because it was such a cool piece of music. And that ended up being a piece called Uncharted Worlds, and that's by Sam Hulick. And I just love that piece of music. There's nothing like, that's my favorite piece of music from Mass Effect. It was amazing. So he came on. We brought him on to help me during that period. And then a couple months later, everything kind of evened out, and I was back at it. But Sam stayed on board, and he wrote some more music. He wrote for a couple of months, and then there wasn't much to do for a while. And then suddenly, all of the cinematics, and this is normal for games. All the cinematics, the interstitials that happen in the game, came in 2 weeks before we had to be finished, and it was 40 minutes of music. And so I told him, look, I can do this, but I need 2 more guys, including, in addition to Sam and myself, I need 2 more guys, and I need 3 weeks. They said, okay. So I brought on Richard Jakes, and then David Cates. Both these guys are really good friends of mine. So, and they all did a great job. Effect 2, I enjoyed the collaboration because it kept things really fresh. I looked at the whole game design, and there's all these worlds where you have to go out and acquire these people. I don't know if you played the game.
I did.
You have to acquire all these henchmen that you're going to use for the end game. And I thought, well, this is the perfect game to work with a team on, because each guy can create their own world. You know, it doesn't have to sound exactly like what I'm doing. So what I did was I did all of the scoring that had to do with the critical path of the game, and then I had these guys do all those kind of missions where they go out and find stuff. So Sam did some, and David, and then we brought this other guy, Jimmy Henson, because Richard Jakes was not available. So Jimmy Henson was, he's another amazing guy. He's young, and he hadn't really done any games yet, and he works a lot on OC Remix. He just contacted me one day and said, "Hey, I really like your work. Would you mind if I remix some of it?" I'm like, "No, go for it." And I gave him some stuff, and he had never heard any of the Mass Effect stuff or Jade Empire or anything like that. So he got into it, and he did like 10 remixes, and they're all great in their own way, you know. And I thought, wow, maybe we could use some of this stuff in Mass Effect 2, you know. We ended up not doing any kind of remix stuff for Mass Effect 2, but I thought it was kind of a cool idea. And I just loved his aesthetic. So he came on board and did some great work on Mass Effect 2.
Yeah, I noticed that Mass Effect 2 has the soundtrack is very character driven. I mean, a lot of its pieces are really character focused because there's so many unique characters in that game.
Yeah, it was kind of a special challenge, actually. When I first heard about the game design, I was like, is this really going to be fun? You know, all you're doing is going out and getting these people, going out and getting people all the time. You know, so it's like one of the
first half of the game is just picking up your teammates.
Yeah, but it's actually, each one is its own environment, and it's fun to do that, I thought, and it worked out great. But you know, in the beginning, I was like, wow, how are we going to do this?
That was a challenge in Mass Effect 2 compared to Mass Effect 1, where it was more story driven.
Well, Mass Effect 1 was this enormous universe. It was huge, and Mass Effect 2 became more personal about the characters. Mass Effect 1 was just this giant story, epic story, and so, you know, everything was a bit wider in terms of scope. Like, you know, you would do like a theme for the Citadel, and then you would do a theme for this world, and then the theme for this world, and you know, whatever. And then there's the galaxy theme, which, you know, is
when you're on the star map or whatever.
Yeah,
right?
That was the Uncharted Worlds thing, and it just had this feeling of vastness. You know, it was a little bit more stretched out and less, you know, melodic in terms of, ooh, that's the melody. You know, the themes were strong. I'm not saying that, but and they were written to be strong. But yeah, it was kind of a different feeling, really. And then some people were disappointed that Mass Effect 2 was less like that, because people really thought that was unique and special to have all these electronics. And, you know,
synth
synth, and you know.
As they say, the whole like a Blade Runner and Dune influences and whatnot.
Yeah, exactly. Those were our influences.
Yeah.
And that really helped us to come up with something that you know, was reminiscent of that, but sounded also its own thing. Yeah.
How do you feel about video game music and film music? Because both are sort of, now the lines are getting blurred. You know, it used to be that video game music had this whole whimsical nature to it, and it was just its own thing. And you know, there's a lot of games coming out now where the scores they sound like scores for a movie. What do you feel the future for video game music? How do you feel that's shaping up to be?
Well, I think it's great. I think it's much more competitive than it was when I started, and I think that's a good thing. You know, when I started back in '96, there's probably a handful, maybe a half dozen to a dozen people in the world that were making music for video games or something. And since then, it's become fairly high profile. I mean, you know, in the last 5 years or so, you know, you've had Danny Elfman writing the theme for Fable. You've got Hans Zimmer doing Modern Warfare, Call of Duty. You've got, you know, and they're all doing it. And, you know, they raise the bar for everybody. Because they come in, you know, both creatively and business-wise, because they'll come in with their huge salary demands that they get for their big films, and these video game companies are paying it. And so that raises the bar for everybody, the bar for creativity and for good stuff, but it's only improved the industry. I feel better when I work in a game knowing that I competed with the best people in the world. I don't want to work in an industry where everybody is less than another industry. And I don't feel that way anymore. I feel like the people working in this business are really excellent at what they do. And they're creating great scores. I'm actually fans of other game composers, where maybe 5 years ago I didn't even feel that way. I didn't feel like game composers were as creative as maybe the film world was. But now I feel like, you know, with Jesper Kyd, what he does with Assassin's Creed is incredible. And you know, other people I admire, Tom Salta, you know, Marty O'Donnell's just, he and Michael Salvatore for Halo brought real humanity to that score. Whereas every other video game is just, you know, beating you up on musically, you know, if there's combat music, it's just, you know, but they, you know, they'll do the whole counter thing where there's this epic battle going on, they have this sad music playing, it's wonderful, you know, and that brought a real humanity to that score, and it's part of what makes Halo great. Because, if we can find that signature, that sound, it's going to make all the difference, you know, and that's what's exciting.
It's a whole auteur theory for video game music, where you go to the person that you know is good at doing this.
Yeah, when we reach that point, we're getting there really quick. Then it's going to be a golden age for the music in this business, and people are already noticing it, you know, through Video Games Live or through, you know, podcasts like what you're doing. People are hearing this music and they're enjoying it and they like it, even outside the game. You know, it's good stuff.
Well, Jack, you saw a future for this genre, and you are one of the architects of this burgeoning future, no doubt. Thank you so much for your time and your amazing contributions to the world of video game scores.
Hey, thanks a lot, Mo. Appreciate it.